All right. Thank you, Karen. And thanks, everyone, for coming today. I really appreciate your time. And I think it's going to be very valuable because we're going to learn four things on how to deal with the marketplace, but also these skills, the four things I'm going to teach you are very transferable into many other areas, and we'll talk about that. But first, I want to do a little poll in how experienced people are at negotiation. If we could, are you very experienced, somewhat experienced, or you're a novice? So if you could take that poll, that'd be great. See what we got here. Let's see. So we have 30% novice, 60% somewhat, 10% experts. So I expect to have questions from you, experts. So what I want to look at initially is how we communicate our needs to the world. And this is very fundamental because we start to get along the lines of kind of how we show up in a negotiation or any type of communication. And to my way of thinking, we communicate our needs to the world by persuasion, influence, and negotiation, and how effective we are at communicating our needs using those skills, persuasion, influence, and negotiation, determines if, in fact, our needs are met. Now, I have this graphic here because how we communicate, how we show up in a negotiated setting is important. One-on-one, this little chestnut I'll trot out. People listen to the volume of your voice first, then the tone, and lastly, and sadly, the content. So if you have issues in verbal communications, know that there is some physical things that operate the amplitude of your voice. So if you think negotiation or persuasion or influence, or when you're communicating to the marketplace and your customers, is about being forceful and overconfident, confident, yes, forceful sometimes, and we'll talk about what we're going to give you today. And what we're going to give you today is that confidence, because confidence is based on knowledge. When we have knowledge, subject matter knowledge of something, in this case, we're going to talk about this four-element thing on persuasion, influence, and negotiation, we can be more creative. We can feel free. We know that certain things will occur, and therefore we know what the playing field is, and we can better exist on that playing field. And this is super critical when you're communicating your needs to the world. Knowing that knowledge of how things are going to be allows us a certain amount of freedom. So remember I said how we carry our voice, volume, all that stuff. At the end of the day, when we engage people, they want to feel good. We're going to talk about the biology today. We're going to talk about the four things, and we're going to talk about the systems approach to negotiation. And this is a topic I cover in my books and my podcast, The Persuasion Lab. And we're going to kind of unpack this. So if you get nothing out of today, if you do these four things, you probably can improve your performance, not only in the marketplace, but in a lot of areas of your life. And I do have actual examples that I live every day. So at the end of the day, when you confidently show up to a negotiation, you feel confident because you have this knowledge base, you're ready to engage in a conversation. A lot of people think a negotiation is something different. A lot of people have some anxieties over negotiation. We have different ways. And you have to think of a negotiation as a conversation where I'm confident and relaxed to get information, and I'm going to share information, and then I will communicate effectively, persuasively to get my needs met. I want you to be relaxed, but there's no way I can just say be relaxed in a negotiation, because a lot of people have a pretty negative view of negotiation. And let's talk about that now. And I think we're ready for our second poll. Solomon, can you put that up on how do you feel about negotiations? Are you comfortable? Are you anxious? You don't really know what to do, or do I avoid them if I can? Just take a minute, take that poll, and we'll go over the results. All right, so very common response. I'm anxious, uncomfortable, don't know what to do, or avoid. This is interesting because in my live seminars, the number one hand raise is avoid. It's not in this group, just an interesting observation. But let's talk about that, because in order to be effective at getting that knowledge, that confidence building knowledge in negotiation, we have got to transcend biology. And I really mean that in a literal sense. We are going to transcend our own biology and the biology of the other person by getting them out of their limbic system. Limbic system, of course, is the more primitive parts of the brain that give us this anxiety, this fear of the unknown. We don't know whether to freeze, run away for it, flight, or fight. Man, this is combat. I have to be like some really slick negotiator guy, or I hope to give you a little step to the people listening today to get to that fourth area. That fourth area is when you feel confident, you feel powerful, you feel like you have agency, because you're going to get knowledge on the 21st century research on negotiation that I teach, that in my podcast, my newsletter, however, you get the information. There's a lot of good research on how we negotiate, because I want to get out of that limbic system and I want to get into the frontal cortex. I want to have that higher reasoning so people can focus on the problem, not the people, which is a Fisher and Uri Getting to Yes precept, a book written in the 1980s. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So most of you do feel some type of anxiety, because you probably have an image of what a negotiator is. Is it the car salesman, maybe? Is it when I'm going for a promotion or sitting in a job interview, a panel interview, which is actually engineered to increase anxiety? Or is it something like trying to convince my team to make a good life choice? These are all stressful situations. We have to be persuasive. We want our needs met. Of course, we want the job, we want the promotion, we want to close the deal with that customer. We want to communicate persuasively in the marketplace. What do we do? How do we get this sense of agency and power and confidence so we can show up in a negotiation knowing what it is? And my online course is called You Can Negotiate Like a Boss by Being Yourself. And you really can do well by being yourself. You don't have to be this guy in a negotiation, some kind of little sleazy guy who, if you ever saw Glenn Ross, Baldwin plays the Blake character, really hard guy in negotiation, haggler, very aggressive. Well, that actually works for some people. It doesn't work for the vast majority of people. In fact, if you think you have to be someone else, that undermines your confidence in how you show up to the negotiation. So you're going to have to find your own agency and your confidence. And to my way of thinking, it's what we teach, what we do. And we're going to take a big step forward today with these four things. Just want to tee it up because, as I've said, we communicate our needs to the world by persuasion, influence, and negotiation. And how effective we are determines if, in fact, our needs are met. Our needs are met. So how do we do that? How do we effectively create that? And it is, of course, getting beyond the biology. How do we transcend those primitive core parts of the brain into the frontal cortex, out of the limbic system, so that fear, that anxiety can go away? Let's look at a little bit of the popular press in negotiation. So in 1980, there was a book by two gentlemen, Fisher and Uri, called Getting to Yes. Getting to Yes. It's a great book. I read it. I recommend it all the time. Those precepts formed the foundation of their Harvard project on negotiation, PON, P-O-N. There's a newsletter. I've subscribed to that newsletter for years, but they don't stray far from the basic precepts of that book. And I feel like that book needs really to be upgraded and expanded. In fact, contemporary negotiation science is expanded it and criticized it as well. And I'll tell you one of my big critiques. So getting to yes stands for the point of, be hard on the problem, soft on the people. Don't go ad hominem. Don't attack the negotiators. Don't attack the people. If people do attack the negotiators, call it out. You want to know what your walkaway point, your best alternative to negotiated agreement, the tortured acronym of BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement. And then if you're at an impasse, brainstorm. Try to get creative solutions to create a win-win. I can tell you, I read that book when I first started negotiating. I was a legal intern at American Airlines in their technology legal practice group. And the issue, the pressure, the psychological warfare about getting a win-win when you keep everyone happy is like, oh, that's a strategy. You got to figure out and creatively get everyone happy. And the archetypal example they use is an orange. Two parties negotiating over an orange. And you actually find out one person wants the zest for a cake and the other wants the fruit to eat or make orange juice or something, the flesh. Well, in my world, after 25 years of legal practice, everyone wants the entire orange. So what do? You don't use win-win as a negotiation strategy. Win-win is not a negotiation strategy. Your job is to communicate your needs to the world effectively so your needs are met. It is not to try to make everyone happy, because it's a fool's errand. You have to look at more objective criteria of, why are we here? Is there a way we both can objectively meet our criteria in order for us to go together in some type of transaction, a settlement, and to avoid a dispute? So win-win is not a negotiation strategy, but it's a really awesome name for a cute baby panda. And that's where I want to leave it. If you think win-win is a pressure, it's more often used as a psychological warfare. I have seen settlement checks where the person paying writes win-win ? In the memo field, because they feel like, oh, you weren't a good negotiator because I don't feel like I won. Well, they didn't win because they actually did something very wrong. But you have to think about win-win as, it's great to have if you have it, but it's really not a strategy. So what do? What is a strategy? The two main blocks we have to work in our negotiation world is to first engage the biology using the 4 steps we're going to go to. Very simple 4 steps I'm going to give you. And then we want to get into the systems level of thinking, which has to do with strategies, tactics, and operations. Strategies, basically your plan, tactics, what you do during the negotiation, operations, things external to the negotiation that can impact its outcome. So how do we do that? How do we engage your biology? And here's the secret. There's a great book called The Like Switch you should read. It's written by a PhD psychologist who actually happens to be FBI guy. His job was converting agents into double agents. And I can summarize the book for you in one sentence. people want to feel good about themselves. That's it. If you can make people feel good about themselves, they are much more likely to engage you in positive negotiations. If you think that you're going to impose your will on someone, those deals are not durable. In fact, the University of Washington in St. Louis, Washington University in St. Louis, did a study about what deals end up in litigation. What deals end up in litigation? Deals that are negotiated, where the parties felt like they contributed to the goal and are enfranchised, stand the test of time. The deals that were imposed or when the parties agree too soon, those deals fall apart. Even if objectively the party that wanted to unravel the deal, quote, won the deal, got the lion's share objectively, if they didn't feel like there was give and take or some type of transaction, if they don't feel heard, if they felt bad about themselves at the end of that negotiation, those deals fall apart. So this human component is very important in making your deals not only come to some type of agreement, but also to stand the test of time. So let's look at the 4. So begin with your biology. How do we do that? We open up with an empathic statement. We're going to listen after we drop that statement. We're going to repeat to confirm, or authors call it different things like mirroring. Voss's Never Split the Difference, he calls it mirroring. And then you're going to present some options. And one of the options you don't want and one of the options you want. Because people want enfranchisement. They want to feel like they have a choice and control. So let's drill down in each one of these 4 points so you can become more effective at your engagement. What is an empathic statement? It's very easy. It's stepping in someone else's shoes. Stepping in someone else's shoes. Trying to experience as best you can what they're going through, okay? Your customer may have an issue with quality control, and you may have, say, a quality control expert that you want to have them hire for a 6-month period as an outside consultant. Quality control is an issue, and you may open up the issue and you may say something like, it seems like where you are, quality control is an issue, or it must be really frustrating when things come back damaged or impure, or or the returns. That must seem really frustrating. And notice the words I use, and it's very specific. The words I use are not, which was the darling of the 90s, I'm hearing, I'm seeing it, it looks to me like. No, take yourself out of the equation. It's all about them. They want to feel validated. They want to feel good. If it's your customer, if it's your teen, my teenager, blowing curfew, a lot of anxiety for dad. What do I do? Well, hey, it seems like there's a lot of pressure to go out and have a good time with your friends because you're, back from college or whatever. That's the opener. It would be great if this happened. How does that sound to you? And then you let them talk. So you really, an empathic statement is simply putting yourself in their shoes and making a statement and labeling it. And there's a tension over this. If you label it like peer pressure or quality control is a problem, and you may think they're going to come with an outrage. You don't know me, and they'll be outraged because you put a label on it. The opposite is actually true. If you can try to label things, give them some type of reference point, that person feels like, oh, this person does understand. And even if you don't, even if you mislabel, it's not a hostile relationship. I'll show you what happens in a minute. So we make that empathic statement. It seems like, it looks like, again, not I am perceiving, it's just put it out there. It looks like, it seems like, and then you're just going to listen. You're going to be the pug. You're going to look and listen. Do not interrupt. When we interrupt people in conversation, that basically is saying, I'm more important than you, and I'm going to bully you, which is a darling of every attorney. But if we're trying to persuade, influence, or negotiate, you do not want to interrupt. You want it to go along. You want them to talk themselves out. And for people like me who are, mine's going a million miles a minute, and we have a bunch of things, and we get paid by the hour and the minute and the sub-minute, it kind of drives us crazy. And we're going to have to take a long view. And that's what, I've been practicing law, but I founded this analytics company called Negotiation Strategist Research. You can go to the website. And what we do is some litigation firms will call us when litigation is not the solution, when that adversarial interrupt you, talk over you is not the solution. And things have to have a more objective approach. We use a lot of statistics, analysis, game theory, if you know what that is, probabilities, outcomes, payoffs, to get to a solution, because it's not about that typical transaction. It's more of what's going on. Let's get the information. Let's let everyone say their piece and listen, and then we can reach a solution that may or may not be possible. But listening is a skill, and it is very difficult for Americans. Americans love to talk, and we like to talk over people, and we are very uncomfortable with silence. Sometimes it's good. Let the person talk and give a little gap where you don't jump in, and then you do the following, which is our step 3. Number 1 was empathic statement. 2 is listen. The third step is repeat to confirm. In my first book, I call it R2C, but Voss calls it mirroring. I don't like using mirroring because there's a physical component to mirroring and body language. Mirroring and body language is basically when you do what the other person does. And when you do what they do, then they feel more comfortable, not in a mimicky way, but in a very subtle way. If someone, folds their hands like this, and you may want to do that. If someone does the akimbo thing, you kind of do that. You kind of mirror them very subtly, not to mock, but they feel comfortable because you're not doing some weird body contortion. I mean, I was at a lacrosse game. My daughter was playing, and I was talking to this woman, and she was doing like yoga poses in the bleachers next to me while she was talking to me. I felt very distracted, and it was kind of strange. But don't do yoga poses when you're negotiating, please. But we do want to repeat to confirm. What does this do? 3 things happen. Remember, empathic statement, we gave you a label. They talked for a while, and now we're going to repeat to confirm. This does 3 things. 1, it makes sure that we got all the facts correct. If we didn't, they're going to correct us, and that's okay. 2, and most importantly, it feels like they were listened to. Remember that book, The Light Switch? They feel validated. They feel liked. Likability, Robert Cialdini's book, 1984 book called Influence, talks about likability. People who we like, we enshrine them with all these attributes, these virtues. Oh, they're smarter, they're this, they're that, just because we like them. It's not objective, it's just something. So if you want people to like you, then listen to them. When we listen to them, and if we repeat what they said, they feel like we do listen to them, and they like us better than someone who talks over them and who has something so important to say they have to interrupt, right? So you don't want to do that. And third, of course, it allows us to pace the negotiation. Error correction, got the story straight, validates the person, and gives us a little plus. Maybe that's 4 elements. So, and that kind of ties up that thing. And once you do those 3 steps, now you can try to influence or persuade your ask, essentially. And these things will work in many situations. So what does that ask look like? Let's talk about the ask next. It has to do with options. And you generally want to present 2 substantive options. What do I mean by that? I mean options that I believe are plausible, that can really have a solution that are objectively different, What do I mean by that? I was in a settlement transaction. This law firm, it's a litigation firm, they refer cases to me when litigation is not an option, when it's not a high probability situation of anyone getting anything. And the final proposal were 3 options. They give us 3 options on the demand letter. All the options were the same thing, worded a little bit differently. And any chimpanzee could tell that this really wasn't an option. And of course, it was rejected. What do you do? How do you structure options after we've done those 3 things and you want to persuade someone to take the lightened path, which is the path that you want them to go? Well, you kind of want to be a little biased. You want to talk about the losses, the dark side of something, because Richard Thaler, Nobel laureate 2017, social economist, talks about loss aversion. And there's lots of studies, Berkeley studies on loss aversion, how we value being safe more than upside. In other words, loss aversion is highly valued more than upside. So in your option structure, you do not want to have 2 equal things. You want one to talk about loss aversion or a loss that will suffer if they don't take the enlightened path, which is how you're trying to persuade them. And you may think, well, it's true. And these are, you're thinking, oh, do I have to deceive? And absolutely not. There's 2 rules I have to negotiation. Never lie, and don't disclose everything, because legally you may not be able to. You may be subject to a non-disclosure agreement, in which case you can't talk about anything in your head. You may have trade secrets of your employer that you cannot disclose, pricing formula, customer list, stuff like this that you may keep secret. So legally, you cannot say everything. You shouldn't say everything. You should always tell the truth. If your mouth is open, you should be telling the truth. That means that little white lie eventually will turn into misrepresentation, which can cause civil problems, which eventually can turn into fraud, and fraud has criminal sanctions. Now, before you structure these things, before you start negotiating and looking at your, what is fraud, all that, everything I say today, of course, is not legal advice. It's informational, but think about lying is basically the seed of every major crime. So if your lips are moving, in a negotiation, you should be telling the truth, because it'll undermine your credibility, and you will be very lonely in your deal making exercises. So those are the 2 things. I want 2 options. One that is how I want the direction I want to influence them, and one that talks about loss, creating some type of loss, because people value losses more than they value gain. So that would make your position better. Now, what you don't want to do in structuring your options, this 4th element, is too many options. Too many options are overwhelming, and they generally lead to non-decision. For example, on that letter I talked about, I would have much rather had less options that were, or like, here's your option that I can negotiate, or 2 options, an attractive one and an unattractive one, that I may be able to morph, rather than 3 ones that said the same thing, or too many different flavors. So I'm a judge at the American Bar Association's negotiation competition. We go to law schools, and the students kind of act out these scripted negotiations, and they don't know facts, and it's kind of a competition, basically. And the issue is there's tremendous pressure to be creative, because that's what Fisher and Uri teaches, and they're still teaching only getting TS in a lot of law schools, and they probably should be teaching some more contemporary works. But generating brainstorming to break an impasse is great, but a lot of times I notice the students come up with so many options there's no well-framed, this is a way to settlement, this is a way to agreement, this is how we can come together on this interaction. What you want to do is present a limited number. I like two. You can go for a short number. It depends on what you're trying to do. But do not overstimulate the negotiation, because that option piece is going to fall apart. Now, so that's the three. Okay. Empathic statement, listen, repeat to confirm, offer options. Now, this is powerful. My company, Negotiation Strategy Research, I was coaching a client. So there was 3.6 million due in a very ambiguous contract, but it was so ambiguous, nobody wanted to litigate it, either side. So we had to somehow get back to rebuilding the relationship. And part of the client, the exercise I gave him, which I give to many, is I want you to practice the things I teach every day. Try to shoehorn them into every aspect of your life for the next few weeks. Because, there's no magic way. There's no like Jedi mind trick where I show up, or, my client shows up and I script it and then they write the $3.6 million check. It doesn't happen. Those deals take time. It takes trust. It takes some information exchange. It's not a binary decision. There's no like magic to it. But getting in that mindset of using these four things every day is something. And this is TMI, and he said it was TMI, but this client had been estranged from his significant other. And he said, Martin, you told me to use it and I actually use it with my significant other. And for the first time in months, something happened, and I'll let your, something positive happen. And I'll let your imagination do that. But it really can be used. Why? Because people want to feel good about themselves. If you listen to people, you enfranchise them, and then they feel safe. They know, like, and trust you. That's why those 4 steps are so important. So remember, we got the 4 steps in. Now we're going to get into the system side. I'm going to briefly go over the system side. There's a lot of components to each system, but I'm going to give you the cheat notes, the crib notes for it. So there's 3 systems in negotiation. You can use those 4 anyways. In fact, I'll show you how those 4 are almost, it's a thread that can run throughout these things. So that's my name of my course with all the stuff. But strategy, stuff we do beforehand, tactics at the negotiation, operations, things external. So let's go into how do you master a strategy. It's easy. In my approach, there's like this 8-point strategy. It begins with knowledge, because knowledge breeds that confidence, right? And all strategy is getting a plan. There's a researcher at Northwestern University, and she says you should spend 80% of your time in your negotiating interactions on strategy, on your plan and running the plan. You certainly can adapt the plan if things go sideways, but if you show up like seat of the pants negotiator, your outcomes are much less likely. Imagine that if I expect my negotiated session to run an hour, with her formula, I should spend, essentially 80% of that time, the time I have beforehand, negotiating. For example, if I had 10 days to prep, I would probably spend 8 of those days prepping for that one-day negotiation, or one-day negotiation in this case. So that plan is really important because it gives you opportunity. It gives you opportunity to deploy those 4 things within the 8 elements, which we're not going to go today. And remember, much to the contrary beliefs of those law students, I hear this every single year about what's your strategy? Oh, I'm going for a win-win strategy, and I know it's a pet peeve. You're saying, Martin, will you give it up? You obviously have hostile images of this win-win thing, but it bothers me because it's been thrown in my face so many times in the last 25 years. I hate it. Remember, win-win is a cute little panda. It's not a strategy. Let's get into tactics. All right. tactics, things we do at the negotiation. And I want to talk about the third book I published, which is called 161 Negotiation Tactics. And let me tell you how we developed it. I polled 60 people who self-identified as professional negotiators, defined as I spend more than half my day negotiating. They typically were salespeople, attorneys. There were some police officers and whatnot. And I gave them a list, and they, what are your top 10 negotiation tactics? And I'll tell you their top tactic in a minute here. But what was interesting is when I looked at the data, I grouped it in what I called, these 5 different things. And I'll show you the 5 different groupings, let's say here. So authority, these are tactics that deal with a law. The law says this, so do this. Or a trusted news source, NPR says this, or, the Wall Street Journal says this, or The Economist says this. That's an authority. Or my boss says this, or I can't do that because my significant other wouldn't approve. So that's using authority to persuade. Deal structure, this is kind of how we structure deals and the terms of a transaction to favor us. For example, if I'm charging a person hourly, that typically allocates risk of cost escalation from the provider of services to the buyer of services. Flat fees do the opposite. That's like a deal structure tactic. Another personal tactics of and about people. Physical tactics have to do with lighting. Process has to do with process and policy of the company. And this one, help desk. Can you do this for me? I'm sorry, that's not our policy. We have a policy against that. Way to handle that is just ask for the policy. Only 70% of the time, 70% of the time the policy is not produced. Only 30% of the time there actually is a written policy or process in place. So it's like a rich oral tradition that a lot of people in the help desk don't know. So let's focus on personal, because at the end of the day, people negotiate deals. That's why these 4 steps is your first your first deployment of your persuasive communication. I say lead with it because most tactics tend to be personal tactics. That's why these 4 steps are really important. And they will work a lot of the time. They will not work every time, okay? Professional negotiators kind of know it. But for a lot of things, people want to feel good. That's why it's so effective. People want to feel good. It all makes sense. So I want you to use it for empathic statement, listen, repeat to confirm or mirror, and finally present options. That's why I think it's really important, because most of the identified tactics are personal tactics. And I interviewed, so they gave me the top 10, but I actually interviewed hostage negotiators, combat veterans, physicians, psychologists to get to the 161. It's how I got to all those. But generally, it's what's the tactic, how you handle it, and what you do with it. And in the podcast, the #1 episode that people download is how to deal with a narcissist. I mean, that's a personal trait. Why? Because a lot of people in the C-suite, a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers, a lot of scientists are a little bit narcissistic, and we know all about that, don't we? They tend to be at higher levels. How to negotiate that with them, how to persuade them seems to be something that people like. So subscribe to the podcast, little pitch, shameless promotion. Let's talk about tactics. The #1 tactic, and I have a fun visual aid here, is the open-ended question. Oh, get it? I had an artist do that for me. Open-ended question is a #1 tactic according to that poll. Now, what is an open-ended question? Open-ended question is when you don't give the answer. How much do you want for it? I don't know. What do you think it's worth? We didn't talk about a number. I'm trying to elicit them to anchor a number so I can either go up or down depending on if I like it or not. Open-ended questions are just that. They're questions that elicit something else that someone else fills in. That's the #1 tactic used by professional negotiators. Just threw that in because it speaks to how to master tactic. Tactics are about asking questions. When you ask questions, you get more information. When we get more information, we can make better decisions. So that's That open-ended question, number one tactic. Finally, I want to talk about the system of operations. This has to do with things external to the negotiation. It can be body language, it can be room layout, it can be your own biology. They're actually biochemically, our blood determines our ability to agree and not agree. There's all kinds of studies on with parole boards and everything, kind of beyond the scope of today, but knowing these external factors is important. I'm going to go into a few examples here. Face and body language, really important when you're dealing with people, but it's not the end all and be all. And I want to say this because there's a few things before, when anything happens, when anyone's on trial, you see all the YouTubers get up with their experts on, it's all bunk, because everyone who can do body language and reading well operationally, you have to have a baseline. You have to know how that person behaves normally. And generally, if we saw someone who's rushed into the spotlight in popular media like overnight, we don't have a baseline. We don't know how they act normally, and you can misinterpret things. Like for this this first picture, that is I took Paul Ekman's class, which is on micro expressions, how to read facial expressions. That when you squint your nose like that, it's kind of disgust, like I don't like it. And if you took his class and you're like, oh my God, you'd say, oh my God, she's disgusted. Well, she could be, but look, she's staring into the sun. Maybe she's doesn't like staring at the sun and she's squinting because it's so bright. And this guy, remember, he's our guy, he is hiding something because his arms are crossed. Well, maybe, or maybe he's just cold. So this is why this whole mythology of reading faces and body language does exist, but you need the baseline and you have to know alternative theories. And by the way, micro expressions are only flashed in 1/25th of a second. They generally don't stick. So theoretically, they give us windows into the mental state of the parties. But if you're really looking at someone in a poker table or something, that's why they wear sunglasses, because you get a lot of information around your, oris oculi, is a muscle around your eye. Then you kind of get a reading on them. And but it's very fast. And are you going to be looking at people's eyes? Or are you going to be looking at your cards or someone else? A lot of options. So that's operationally. Let's talk about staging for a minute. How we show up in a room. How, remember that room? The biggest thing you can do is confidence and know what's going on. John Reed is a law enforcement interrogator researcher, and he talks about how to create tension in a room. And I showed up the Reed room, which shows, the accused in a corner with a table and detectives around him, and he's far from the door, and there's no light switches or temperature control in his room. And these rooms are engineered to get confessions, to put people under stress. Now, one of my students, I was lecturing at the university the other day, and he said, I just went into a panel interview, and I said, how does it look? And we drew it on the board, and this is what we drew. And this is a John Reed room. You have the interviewee, their back is towards the wall, they're far from the door that they can get out of the room. There's a physical barrier and there's a human barrier between them. There's no light switch or temperature control of him. This guy is under stress to see how he behaves. Now, was this intentional? Probably not. Can it be intentional? Yeah. Do people do this? Absolutely. This college student just went through this. So staging a room is something external, again, operational negotiation, external, that can impact its outcome. So at the end of the day, operations are about focus. Those are the three tactics. Strategy is about a plan. Tactics are about asking. Operations are about focusing on your needs. All that external stuff, the body language, the facial stuff, know what your requirements are. Know what need you are trying to meet. So I want to leave some time for questions. And I think we have around 10 minutes, Karen, I think. So let's review on how we communicate our needs to the world. We do that by persuasion, influence, negotiation. Now, when we have confidence with knowledge, we present ourselves better people feel better about us. If we're nervous, if we're showing anxiety when you show up, you will not be optimizing your performance. Now, how do you get that in a very short way? Transcend that biology, that fear-based reaction, fight or flight limbic system with knowledge of our four things. What do we want to do? We want to open up with an empathic statement, step in their shoes. We want to listen like that cute little pug. We want to mirror, repeat to confirm so we get it right. And then you want to present a couple of options ideally. And only then can we address those systems. You can run your plan. You can work in the 4 to your tactics, because most tactics are personal. And just be aware that operationally, you can get distracted, but just focus on what the need you're trying to communicate. And I think that's all I have. If you want to subscribe, let me know to the newsletter's free. Podcast, of course, it's called The Persuasion Lab, is free. And I'm happy to take any calls if you want to call me up and ask me a question. Happy to support you, make you better negotiators. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What if the other side just won't negotiate? I mean,
they don't want to negotiate, then you don't have a negotiation. A lot of times, if they take a irrational position and they don't want to negotiate, and you have to negotiate, let's assume that you have to engage this party. It may be maybe a family law issue. It may be a sole source supplier. A lot of times you have to engage third parties, an intermediary. If there's something between the parties that's preventing that negotiation, getting a third party to step as either a neutral party. If it's a dispute, you can use a mediator. If it's a contract, maybe someone they have a strategic relationship and they can sub to you, that may happen, may need to happen. But when parties do not negotiate and you've done all you can and you've used every trick, or not every trick, every technique and trying to get knowledge about it, you sometimes have to bring in a third party intermediary.
gotcha. Now you mentioned telling the truth, and is there a fine line there of how much truth you should tell, and any suggestions for that?
Yeah, I always say the facts relevant to the transaction should be disclosed. If I am selling a car and if I'm selling a keyboard and they're turnkey sticks and I advertise it on eBay, I would want to disclose that. That's a material thing. So if something is material about the transaction, objectively, I know you will want to disclose that, and you're going to have to take a discount on that. If it's sensorial, if it's subjective, if it's my opinion, my opinion is not worth anything. It's worth whatever anyone else's opinion is. But if it's something objective that's material to the transaction, if you do not disclose that, that is misrepresentation. You led someone down a path of something you should have disclosed, that the standard is a reasonable person would have wanted to know, and if you don't disclose it, then that's an issue. And you have to deal with it. And it saves a lot of money. Disclosure saves so much money, especially in securities. You're issuing you're trying to get investment in your company, and you have a line of credit that's $100,000 line of credit, and you don't disclose on your financials. That is personal liability. That's serious. If I was investing in a company and it was a startup and they had a $100,000 overdrawn line of credit, I would want to know that. Disclose material facts. Everything else, you shouldn't disclose, as far as I'm concerned. If they're not material, don't disclose it. Don't say, well, if I were you, I wouldn't invest. No, that's your opinion. I don't care about your opinion. I care about the facts.
Great. We have a question from Femita. Femita, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure. Hi. I was actually typing, but let me go ahead and speak. So often what you talked about was negotiations that happen in a staged environment, but often negotiations are not always staged. Every time I walk into a meeting, I'm negotiating.
Absolutely.
So what are some suggestions or recommendations that you have for this think on your feet thing, especially when you're suddenly put in a spot or blindsided?
Okay, I'll give you a real example. It was a public negotiation. I can disclose it. So I was a principal attorney in the state of Oregon. It's called the Oregon Manufacturers Industrial. It's a big acronym. OMIC R&D is the acronym. Basically, we had 11 people around the table. We had universities, we had government people, we had big companies like Boeing and everything. And the guy from the university stood up, the president of one of the universities, and said, "You're asking us to invest in this, R&D development group, and I have kids who can barely afford tuition. They're living in their cars," and this big horror story about it. And I said, I used the 4 with him. I said, and he occupied time, and it was full of bluster, and it was really cheesing me. But at the end of the day, I said, I hear that your students are really having a hard time with tuition, and I understand that. This is, if they want to pay off that loan, then this is, having big industry contacts may get them that job they need. And anyways, your membership in this organization has nothing to do with tuition. This is a investment for employment after graduation. So I hear what you're saying, but we're not talking about student welfare. He never showed up to another meeting because he was a politician. I mean, a lot of times, not to be pejorative or anything, university presidents are basically politicians. So they show up to these meetings, they suck in everyone's time, and they have nothing to do with the membership, which, we were talking about what should the membership fees do, and he wanted a break. And I tell you, it was so the next week that university made like a $400 million investment in buying a new building. It's like, cry poverty. Well, 400 million probably buy a lot of, tuition. So a lot of people get up because they have to say their piece, because they feel anxiety to participate in a negotiation. Don't be that person. Do substantive stuff. And if someone does something that's totally irrelevant, acknowledge what they say. We had no choice but to listen. I acknowledged what he said, and then I brought it back. Well, this has, it's irrelevant, and not really an option. It was just irrelevant. So, thinking on your fate, it works. I mean, this 4 thing works. You're late for one more thing. I can go all day. You missed your flight. Someone ahead of you gives them hell, right? And this is in a book. This is in Boss's book. They're yelling. All he did was get up to that counter and say, "God, it must be tough having your job." He got a ticket on that flight. She said, the ticket counter person said, "There's always room for nice people." So you can think on your feet and use that. People want to feel good. You can use it all the time.
Well, I guess so. Just as a follow-up, right? So I'm not talking about situations where. So the example that you gave about the president was, somebody higher up. Let's talk about a situation where these are colleagues that you have to work with, and so it's you do have to negotiate with them on an ongoing basis to get stuff done. And sometimes in a conversation, when you either get blindsided or if they come on too strong, often your own fight or flight response goes up, and then you might react without doing the 4 steps that you discussed, because now you feel threatened, and instead of negotiating, now you've started becoming defensive. I'm kind of talking about situations like that. How do you handle that so that your personal emotions are not getting affected, because your fight or flight has kicked in at that point and you're just trying to defend yourself?
And this is where you have to have a good meditation practice, because you're gonna have to recognize, and this is what I call forcing a retreat, and this works for me. How do I force retreat? By using the 4 things. Well, using number 1 is just labeling it. Someone's in your face, one of your cohorts or whatever, they're in your face, they're kind of getting animated, say, it sounds like this is very frustrating for you. And it sounds like, and they will retreat. When people are in your face, and if you label it, they will retreat. There's a few weirdos there. They have something going on in their background and it's triggered. But generally, when I do that, when someone is in my face, and in the legal business, people are always in your face, I label it, and then there's a retreat. It happens all the time, more often than not. I can't remember the last time, and there's sometimes when I generally back down without them saying anything. I mean, I was in one negotiation. I'll never forget this guy, huge man, bald head. I said something and he started getting red. He didn't say a word, but he was red. And the guy I thought his head was going to explode. I basically said, I know hearing this may be upsetting, but it's what our data is showing. And then that gave him, he breathed, and I felt like he was going to have a heart attack in the conference room, and we got through it. So labeling is okay, even in tense situations. I mean, you're going to have to use your judgment, but I generally label. I was at a board meeting, and one board member threw a Kleenex box at the other board member. True story. I said, you know what? I think now's a great time for a break. So if someone's in your face, say, hey, let's take 5 minutes and then reconvene.
Yeah, I really like that. I like the labeling thing that you talked about. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.